Hey, Dan here. And I chose to make a recording and post this video in response to a question I received. So I've been running a free email challenge for coaches, content creators, or consultants who are wanting to step out of their comfort zone and work on building their business. And I'm super grateful. I'm beyond grateful for the wonderful feedback that I have received so far. We're several days into this challenge, and I'm sending email prompts, insights, and reflection questions, as well as a challenge each day. I'm also including resources that align with the topic of the day. If that's something you're interested in hearing more about, I'd love you to send me an email, dan@danw.us, and just put email challenge information or email challenge info in the subject line. And I'm happy to happy to share some of those resources or topics of discussion with you, or answer any questions that you might have wherever you're at in your journey to building your online business, whether you're a coach, consultant, or a creator. If you're interested in that, I'd love to hear from you. Dan@danw.us, and email challenge info in the subject line. Now, I want to come back to the purpose of this video. So I received a great question based off of one of those resources that I'd sent out. The resource is something that had been recommended to me by the late, great Dan Miller, author of 48 Days to the Work and Life You Love. He was a wonderful mentor, a wonderful coach, had a wonderful community of aspiring and several different stage of their journey. Entrepreneurs is what we'll call it. But one of the things that he would do each year that I recall is encourage people for 30 days to watch or listen to the audio, The Strangest Secret by Earl Nightingale. So I chose to share that as a resource based on the topic of the day with the group of people who are participating in my email challenge. And today I received a wonderful question from one of those participants around an idea that's shared in The Strangest Secret. And I'm going to look over here for what the question is here. So he says that in this video, Earl says something like, every man is where he currently is because he wants to be there. That's not a direct quote. It's the idea or the general message that was being communicated or conveyed in that audio. And he goes on to say, while the idea of this is totally clear to me, and I support this statement in general, I always tend to struggle when I want to say something like this or something similar to others. Whenever I want to say something to the effect of, you are where you are because you choose to be there, I think of people who are not as privileged as us, people living in maybe really poor conditions, people that simply do not have the same options as us. And the sentence, all of us living in a certain country within the world, which provides X, Y, and Z, are choosing. That just doesn't bring the point across as well for this person. So, again, I want to say thank you for this wonderful question, the opportunity to share my opinion on this particular topic. First, I'd like to say that Earl also points something else out at the beginning of this audio. He says that we become what we think about. I think those two ideas are really tied well together because I believe that regardless of the circumstances in which you may be born into, now, let me be very clear here. There are people who have circumstances in their lives that are obviously beyond their control. And some of them are very unfortunate. And I don't want to take anything away from people who may be facing circumstances like that. That goes beyond the topic of this conversation. This is speaking more to the general audience that we become what we think about, regardless of the circumstances in which we are presented with in life. We have the ability to choose what it is that we want. And I agree with the statement and the sentiment that we are where we are because we choose to be there. I could simply choose not to take the actions required of me to build my business. I could choose to hide in fear or uncomfort, excuse me, or comfort rather. I could choose to work a 40-hour work week at a normal 9 to 5 or whatever you want to call that. I could choose all of those things to improve different aspects of my life, potentially. I could choose to accept the circumstances in which I grew up with. I grew up in a family with a single mother and two younger brothers, and I watched my mother uh, challenged with taking on full-time school employment in order to make ends meet. And putting all of those pieces together, she worked very hard at all of those things to get to where she ultimately got to. She ended up doing wonderful things and retired from the military as a nurse practitioner, and really chose to change her circumstances. And I saw that as an example, of course, but we didn't have everything provided for us. I didn't have the same resources that I saw that other people might have. I grew up in a military related family. My experience was around the military. That's kind of what I knew. And I didn't know at the time how to necessarily become an entrepreneur. And I didn't know where to go because I didn't see a lot of people who were just reaching out to guide others in the journey like you have access to today. We certainly didn't have the internet at that time. I'm dating myself here, but we didn't have the same resources that others around me might have had access to. I chose to change my circumstances. I chose not to continue my career in the field I was in the military. Once I left the military, I made those choices. I am where I am today because I chose to be here, consciously or subconsciously. There are some great examples from people. Off the top of my head, I'll name two. So Gary Vaynerchuk came from an immigrant family. His mother and father, if I have it correct, immigrated to the United States and started a small business, a liquor store, where he decided to get engaged and work on every aspect of that business and how he might be able to improve it, to change his circumstances, to change the circumstances in which they had come from. Now, his parents chose before that to change their circumstances and to move into an area where they could choose to create more opportunity for themselves. Daymond Johns is another great example. Daymond Johns grew up in a place where his own story, he says that the two options that he really saw a path for were the music industry, where artists were recording music videos and rap songs and other related components. And then he saw the other side of that where he lived was selling drugs on the corner of the street. And he knew that he didn't have the musical inclination or talent to do what he saw this group of people doing, but he knew he didn't want to get involved in the other side and what that group of people were doing. So he figured out for himself how to fit in there. And that created the FUBU brand as an example. So, these people had circumstances which some might look at and say that they were less fortunate potentially. They didn't have access to the same resources, as an example, but they've chosen to change their circumstances. They've chosen to be where they are today. They've chosen to take the actions required of them to shift their position in life and shift their circumstances to what they wanted to create in the world. There's lots of examples that demonstrate how this comes about. And I believe that it's really true. You can choose to change your circumstances. You can choose to accept your circumstances, regardless of where you are at in the world. I've got a friend. She's a wonderful person I met several years ago through another community called Startup Grind. She lives in Pakistan. She owns a shoe manufacturing business and has also evolved into, I don't know if you call it a curator of business, but she manages a semi-large group of service professionals who she markets to the United States for a fair and reasonable cost based on what their needs are and based on what our access to resources is. And she's put together some wonderful businesses to change her circumstances. She could have easily accepted that living in the country she's living in and the circumstances in and around that country limited her, and she didn't have any options, but she chose otherwise. I can think of a bunch more conversations that I've had with people that demonstrate that this is the reality. You are where you are because you chose to be there. You can choose to remain there, or you can choose to change your circumstances. Yes, some people may have to work a little harder than others simply because of the circumstances in which they are presented with, but it's not impossible to change. I hope that does a good job of not just communicating my opinion on the topic, but answering the question that you posed to me. And I thank you once again for sharing that question with me. And to anyone else that's watching this today, thank you so much for being here. Again, if you're interested in the email challenge that I was offering, I would love to run it again in the future. Just shoot me a note, dan@danw.us, and put your inquiry in there. Be sure to add to the subject line email challenge info.